Hello and welcome to this channel. My name is Janet. I'm working through the King James's Bible. Today I'm in the Book of Kings, part 2, and I'm working through chapters 11, 12 and 13. So I'm going to give a summary of each chapter. So let's get to it. So yesterday we left off where Jehu, who was the commander of the chariots for the king of Israel, he basically went on a killing spree for God to wipe out anybody related to King Ahab. So any members of his family, any descendants of him, and any friends actually, or priests or officials, he wiped them all out. Now I thought that meant there was only one king now of Israel, and that would be King Jehu, but that's not the case. Basically, King Ahaziah is who he wiped out, who was king of the Judah tribe. So they are now looking for a new king. Now his mother, Athaliah, she finds out that her son has been killed. And instead of, I would think, grieving over her son, she goes on a massacre to kill anybody who would take her son's place because she wants to reign over Israel. So she kills all the royal sons, and she even goes to the point of trying to kill her grandson. Now Joash, thankfully, has an aunt called Jehoshaphat, and she grabs him along with his nurse and hides him in the temple of the Lord. He remains there for 6 years, and during those 6 years, the queen mother, Athaliah, she reigns over Judah. Now the priest named Jehoiada has a plan. And in the 7th year of the grandson living in the temple of the Lord, he consults with the guards all around him, the guards, different guards, and he makes a covenant with them and the Lord, and it is to protect this boy. He shows them, look, the son who would be rightfully king is here. I need you to protect him on all sides, at the gates, and so they do. They carry out this protection order. Now later, Jehoiada the priest takes Joash, the young boy, out, and he has a crown and he crowns him outside of the temple. And the people are all there, and he anoints him king over Israel. And they say, long live the king! And there's all this commotion going on, and obviously the queen mother, Athaliah, hears this and goes into the temple. And there she sees her grandson, and she shouts, treason, treason, and rips her clothes. Now Jehoiada, the priest, gets the guards around there to grab her, take her outside of the temple, and to kill her outside there. So they do, they take her to the palace, and she is killed. Then Jehoiada makes a covenant with God, with the people, and with the king. And it is to become God's people again, to follow his laws and statutes, basically. So the next mission is to get rid of the Baal Temple and everything in it, which they do. They go down there, they tear down the whole temple, and they even kill the priest in there, who is the priest of Baal. His name is Matan. He is killed as well. So then all the people gather to see this new king of Israel, Joash. And he's only 7 years old, bless him, at the time of becoming king. So we learn that as we end this chapter that peace reigns in the tribe of the Judah tribe, over the Israelite people there. Peace reigns because they've got rid of Baal and they've got rid of Athaliah, who was reigning for 6 years. So that closes our chapter 11. So in chapter 12 we learn that the new king, King Joash, he became king in the 7th year. Jehu, over on the other side of the Israelite tribes, who's running the 10 tribes in Samaria, it was his 7th year of being king. Now we learn that Joshua reigns over the tribes of Judah for 40 years in Jerusalem. And this is like a quick summary of his life at the beginning, and it says that over these 40 years he did really well while the priest was alive, the priest who always took care of him, Jehoiada. But it sounds like once he was gone, he went into worshipping false gods and kind of started sinning, going off the track of the Lord. Because we learned that those high places were not removed, so they're still worshipping on these high altars which are not part of the Lord. So during King Jehosh's reign, he decides that he wants to have the temple restored. So he goes to the priests and he asks them to save the money that comes into them and to use that to basically restore the temple. Now during his 23rd reign over the Judah tribe, he looks around and the temple is not being restored as he'd asked. So he calls forth the priests, Jehoiada, is called, and all the other priests. And he asks them why. Why hasn't this place been restored? And basically it's negligence on their behalf of the priests. You know, they just haven't kept at it. They haven't kept the money management. Nothing's gone on. So it's just been left. So Jehoiada, he basically decides to get a chest and he bores a hole into it. And then that's a place where the people themselves can donate money and funds. And all that money then will go to restoring the temple, which is a great idea. So they put it down there. All the people like this idea because then they're not feeling like the money might be wasted going to the priests specifically, because there are some corrupt priests in there. And so they put the money into this chest and then they can start restoring the temple. Now, it was a great success, this, because they even had enough money now to get different things inside of the temple, like the vessels for the sacred ceremonies. So this was a really good way of managing the money that King Jehoshaphat had introduced to the Israelite tribe there. And they were able to forge relationships with trustworthy tradesmen, so to use the money, they felt safe in trusting them with the money. Plus, the priests themselves didn't have to give up their contributions that were given to them for their hard work, so it worked out really well. Now, next we learn that King Hazael, who is the Syrian king, he starts attacking Gath and he takes over that area of the Israelites. And next he's got his sights on Jerusalem. So King Jehosh decides, right, we need to get all of the gold here, the treasures, and just give that to the king of Syria to stop him coming here and raging war on us. So they do that, they give it to him, and no war comes to Jerusalem. Now we're told that all the other acts of King Joash are in the book of Chronicles, so refer there if you want to learn exactly what happened and in what succession things happened. Now, a twist of fate, we learn here that King Joash, his servants actually turned against him and they plotted a plan to kill him, and they do. They get the sword and he died by the sword, and he is then buried in the city of David along with his fathers. And next in line is his son Amaziah, so he becomes the next king of the Judah tribe. And this closes our chapter 12. Now, as we open up our last chapter, chapter 13 for today, we go over to the Israelite tribe and we learn about the king of Israel over there, which used to be Jehu, but his son now has taken over, and his name is Jehoahaz. Now, he reigns for 17 years. And sadly, he's a sinner in the eyes of God. He's worshipping fake gods, and so, he's leading Israel down a bad path as well. So God becomes very angry with this king, and he delivers them into the hands of the Syrian king. He then oppresses them all, and it becomes really negative for the Israelites on that side. And it isn't until this oppression comes that then King Jehoahaz then pleads to God, help us get out of this oppression from the Syrian people. So God, as always, like he has in the book of Judges, he delivers a saviour and gets them out of their oppression from the king of Syria. And as always, do you think they learn? No, they still carry on sinning even now that they've been released, and they're in tents and they're living in Samaria still in the same area but in tents. And King Jehoahaz sees that his army is a lot smaller now. He doesn't have as many people because obviously the Syrian king has basically got rid of a lot of them. So now it cuts King Jehoahaz's journey short. It says go to the book of Chronicles and you will see all the acts that took place with him. And then we learn that he dies. He is then buried in Samaria and his son takes over by the name of Joash, which is very similar name to the other side of the tribe. So sorry for the confusion here, but we have two kings with the same name. So now Joash, he becomes king over Israel in Samaria, and he reigns for 16 years. And he's an evil king in the eyes of God because he's still worshipping false gods. And again here we see that his journey is cut short in details because it refers us back to the book of Chronicles to see his acts. It just notes that there was war between him and the other Israelite tribes. So there was a civil war that went on during his reign. And then we learn that Jeroboam, he then sits on the throne after Joash because he dies, and that's the one that takes over next. So now we move over to Elisha, the prophet. we hear that he has become sick, and unfortunately it is this sickness which is going to eventually take his life. So King Joash visits him. So we're going back a bit here. Sorry to go back and forth. It's kind of, this is the way it's written down. So we're talking about Elisha the prophet. King Joash is still reigning in this segment, and he's weeping and he's saying to him how weak his army has become. Like, how am I going to get away from the Syrian people? And he's going to Elisha, even though he sort of worships false gods, he's obviously got some connection to the Lord that he wants to seek Elisha's instructions. So Elisha tells him to get a bow and arrow and to go to the east window and to shoot the arrow out of there. So that's what King Joash does. And then Elisha says, "The Lord deliver the arrow to Syria." And he says, "You must attack the Syrians at Aphek until all of them are destroyed." Now I read up on this just as a side note about this shooting out arrows into certain directions. This was customary back then, to shoot an arrow in the area in which an army was going to invade them. So once King Joash has shot the arrow out of the window, Elisha then tells him to now strike the ground with the bow and arrow. So he does that, he does it once, he does it twice, and then he does it 3 times, and then he's had enough and he stops. And Elisha's like, "Why have you stopped? Why didn't you shoot for 5, 6 times? Now this means that you're only going to strike the Syrians 3 times. You're not going to destroy them now." So that's his prophecy given to him. So now we go back to Elisha himself and we learn that he now dies and he is buried. And then we learn some looters come from the Moab tribe and they're looting and raiding the land, and we hear that a man is buried in the same place where Elisha was buried. His body touches Elisha's bones and he comes back to life. It's like, wow, this is a miracle. So as we close this chapter, we learn that Syria, the king of Syria, does oppress the Israelite people, but they do attack back 3 times and they recover some of their cities that had been taken over. So that was my final summary there, and so I hope this information has been of use to you, and we will continue tomorrow with more within the book of Kings 2 into chapters 14 and onwards. Hope to see you there soon. Take care. Bye.